my gosh, he doesn't even need a microphone. Superhuman.
You're yelling in them clubs.
So welcome everybody. This is Mark Bradford's last act at the Baltimore Museum of Art during this visit. I think he's been talking uninterrupted for about 48 hours, possibly more. But I'm sure he's going to acquit himself admirably this afternoon. I'm really grateful to all of you for coming. For those of you who don't know, I'm Chris Bedford. I'm the director of the BMA. I'm here with Mark Bradford, obviously, and Katy Seigel, who is a curator here at the BMA and also my co-curator on the Venice Biennale project with Mark. Tomorrow is another day. So we are going to structure this talk roughly as follows. It's going to be all about painting. We've talked a lot about community engagement and social activism over the course of the last months, and I think it would be really nice to return to Mark's practice as a painter in the studio. But in advance of that, I did want to take a moment to acknowledge the t-shirt that Katy Seigel is wearing, which is slightly obscured by her glasses, and the t-shirt that I'm wearing, which was produced by Greenmount West PowerPress. So as all of you know, there we go. So I can see all the people and kids from Greenmount West in here because you're all wearing those yellow t-shirts that I did not have access to. I just had the one that you can buy in the regular shop. I want those ones with the, with the offset lightning bolt. Those are far more appealing. But Mark made a marriage between Greenmount West Community Center and the BMA, and it's given rise to an extraordinary wealth of creativity for us. The street banners that you'll see lining the streets near Greenmount West as well as near the BMA feature images of kids involved in the program there, imagining themselves as superheroes with their attendant powers. So those are the superheroes of Greenmount West. I'm not sure whether we have any of those people on the banners in the audience, but if we do, you should raise your hand. There we go. So you look amazing on those banners. I can't imagine seeing my kids on banners that big, so it's a great thing to drive down Art Museum Drive and see your faces. And then, of course, we have a resource center within the museum right next to Mark's show where we are selling these t-shirts and tote bags and all manner of other things related to that creative collaboration between Greenmount and the BMA. So I just want to take a second to say that when this concludes, you'll have an hour to go shopping. And 100% of the proceeds from the sale of the $250 Mark Bradford signed tote bags go to Greenmount West. And if we sell all of them, that's $25,000 directly to Greenmount West, which is a... And I also want to say, you know, $250 for a tote bag is kind of a lot of money, but it's the cheapest Mark Bradford signature that you will ever find. So you get 10 million or 250. I mean, it seems to me a real bargain, and it helps an extremely worthy cause. So with that said, I was going to transition to a discussion of paintings. No. Oh, I have to do the thing. Okay. No, neither do I. Unfortunately, I was outflanked. Ugh. So, I'm just going to begin with. I'm going to begin with that slide.
Oh, okay.
And I think one of the first conversations I ever had with Mark was about the relationship between living in the social world and being an abstract painter. And so one of the initial terms we came up with to describe that was social abstraction. And there is Mark before social abstraction was a term in his life. So maybe you could just begin, and then we can open it up for general discussion, talking about how the working in the hair salon influenced your rise as the great abstract painter you are today.
God, I haven't seen these in a minute. Yeah, this is just me working in the hair salon. I'm probably about 20 years old, 20 years old, and that's Carol, one of my clients who actually sits on the board of the nonprofit. We work with foster youth, and actually she is a foster youth advocate. So it's funny, 30, 40 years later. But I think that I wanted to show these older images of me I think I learned a lot about materiality, materials, textures, colors, but using my creativity, but it wasn't that I was thinking about art, I was just thinking about I was in the service industry, but I still texture and proportion, and I always in my studio I actually use a look. Yep, that's actually my mother curling hair. We have the same hands, and I would look in the
That's
mirror.
funny. I really thought those hands were yours.
No, we do have the same hands. I look in the mirror when you're a stylist. You look in the mirror and you at what you're working on. And even I notice in my studio, I look in the mirror sometimes at the painting. So you do use a certain amount of creativity, but I wasn't thinking of it as being art. I was just thinking of it as how I made a living. But it is a creative thing. When I got out of school and I was thinking of materials, I wanted to have a material that had some type of social relationship to it, not just from the art store, that could tell a kind of social history. And I would try to also, I was a painter, so how do you paint without paint? How do you tell a social history? How do you use something that has some feeling to me? Lo and behold, these 2x2 rectangles that you can see for doing a permanent wave, actually that's on a Gloria head, but I started using these 2x2 sheets of paper to make paintings. And that was really early. Can you just keep going? You can just keep going. You can go back. You can go back. But what was I trying to do? I was trying to bridge the gap. I was trying to bridge between sort of having one foot in the world and having this lived history, and also thinking about abstraction and history and where I fit into that. And also being African American, I'll be real formal now, African American. A lot of times I just say black, but I'm just being funny, girl, I say black. But, I think oftentimes what happened is when I got in school, people started asking me these really aggressive questions like, tell me what it feels like to be black, and tell me what it feels like to be from South Central, and tell me what it feels. And I was like, whoa, I'll tell you when I figure it out for myself. And unfortunately, sometimes with stereotypes, they just rise right to the surface. I mean, if you look at unfortunately, a lot of times the internet is really built on stereotypes. I mean, as far as representation. And so how, as an artist, can I wander, figure out things for myself around race, around class, around sexuality, but take the slow road? So I was kind of thinking of these things myself. I started also playing with grids, social grids. This is a topographical grid of a certain part of Los Angeles. I think it's the more wealthy part of Los Angeles. So I started using the social grid and the abstract grid to talk about, the history of abstraction, really. You can just go.
That's a good one.
What is that?
I think that's a detail from the surface of Los Moscos.
No, it's not.
And it's not at all.
Well, I see the tennis shoe in there.
Method Man.
Method Man. Yeah. I actually used to like the rapper Method Man, but this very topographical, and also at the same time looking for elements that are social, and black holes. Kind of these kind of like astro black holes that you could kind of fall into. I always liked science fiction. I was a big science fiction reader. I liked Octavia Butler. I liked Samuel Delany. I was always looking for spaces that were created by African American people that were full of fantasy and full of things that were sort of outside of just the normal history. So I started making a lot of paintings in 2002 around those kind of science fiction and things.
And so one phrase you use that's very memorable to me is some of these paintings, both in materials and their titles, were like sugar cubes to curators. And so this one being called Method Man, after the rapper.
That wasn't a sugar cube to a curator. That was...
Maybe they didn't know who Method Man is.
They were like, well, who's Method Man? Back in the day. You know what? I was always trying to kind of have a relationship with like popular discourse and art history at the same time. If you talk about abstract painting, and you go back to mid-century, and it goes right to Pollock, and it goes to the canvas, and that's going to already be that's going to be read. But how do you infuse it with something else? How do you infuse it with some of my other histories and my personal story? And so I just thought if I used material that came from the world and kind of pulled it into art history, it could never be completely stripped of where it came from. I never wanted it to be kind of, I never wanted the social to be completely lost, but I didn't want it to be over-analyzed at the same time. Does that make sense? And I was just doing that for me.
Yes, and it means that you can see the history, the way people have talked about your painting. They tend to go to all one or all the other and can't think them both at the same time. And that's what's so great about your work. You're thinking about the world and art at the same time, like they're not two separate spaces.
Well, no. I mean, I don't know why people get so. People ask me, well, how can you go from all, how can you go from this site to this site and this color and this ray? How can you move between them? What's the problem? I mean, I don't understand what the problem is. I mean, you just move between them. I don't think the sites are the problem, actually. I don't change for the sites. I make the sites change for me. I don't ship-shape. I'm not different in this community and different in that community. I just take Mark everywhere. I just do. I think that's more of a 21st century way of thinking about things. I think older narratives we had to kind of do more maybe, but I don't think that. I think that we're living in a complex enough community and complex world that we should feel that we belong in any room that we walk into. I didn't say that the room always felt that I belonged, but I always felt that I belonged. So I think it's just a way of looking at it. So for me, I didn't see a problem with being a hairdresser and then taking the material from being a hairdresser and applying it to abstract paintings, although I did dig myself into curatorially, and people would start to talk about the hairdresser and from South Central and all that, but you fall into holes along the way, but you dig yourself out and you keep moving. So I think that sometimes people don't do the work. They reach for the low-hanging fruit, but you just keep going on and making the conversation as complex as you need for it to be. And that's what I just try to do.
So I'm sitting here looking at that. I'm playing my own little game, which is identify Mark Bradford's paintings based on the detail available to us. So I'm pretty sure that is Scorched Earth from 2004. Not 100%, but I'm quite sure. Yeah. And I think so that's a really interesting body of work that I know you were commissioned to do that deals with a particular moment in American history. And I think, you're very adamant that you can't erase the social from the work based on the materials, but you also use titles and moments in history to make sure that they're history paintings as well as being abstract paintings.
Yeah. That series of work was around, in Tulsa, there was something called Black Wall Street, and there was a big riot in the early part of the...
1921.
Bless you, I was like something... and it was burned down, and I took all the topographical maps of that time and built these sort of map-like paintings, but were based on a very particular moment in history. I sometimes go between the kind of social and art history, because at the end of the day, yes, they're going to be paintings. Are you going to show when I had hair?
Not yet.
Oh, okay.
That's coming. When you had hair is coming. It's going to be a glorious moment.
And using modern technology and the idea of pixelation, but I'm using my hand to do it as if I wanted to build a computer using my hand. So this idea of failure, that technology can fail. Mm-hmm. So these kind of micro, macro, up real close and far away, the pixelations done by hand. That was interesting.
So I think it's a really beautiful concept, the idea of making a computer image or a pixelated image using one's hand. So I was giving a tour of your show, a couple of tours this morning, and there's such intense curiosity about the way things are made.
Yeah.
And I've come to think that that's the magic of them, is that we're so far removed from physical labor and the touch of the hand, the touch of the artist, that when people apprehend that, there's a level of magic in it that's sort of irresistible. So I wondered if you could talk just a little bit based on that, even that image, about how physically you work with paintings or paper to make these paintings.
Well, most people who aren't rich work hard. I mean, globally. And in other countries, they work real hard. I mean, really, so the idea of labor, and in the art world, it's funny, we separate it. We talk about production and labor. You know, to be an artist, and you know, I can have my work produced by someone else. You know, it's a very different thing than the labor. I have always labored. I mean, that's all I knew how to do. So for me, even when I was broke and I needed more money, I've just labored. When I worked in the hair salon, I labored. I went to school. So working hard has never been something that I associate with being bad.
And you can see the best artists have that kind of knowledge in their hands. You, Jack Whitman,
my hands.
people
Yeah,
who've done
always,
stuff.
Yeah, it's my hands. So I kind of, that was never something that I looked down upon. But in my work, it became something that it just became part of my work. If I work myself into a corner, I have to kind of labor my way out of it. I mean, I can have all the theoretical ideas, but when the painting falls apart, you gotta fix it. You know, it's sort of like, you know, so it's kind of the same thing.
So this is a picture of you from the early 2000s, probably.
When I had hair.
So cute.
Holding merchant posters.
Yeah, you know what? It's just, I'm always been fascinated by details. Little things that point to something that points to a larger conversation. I've always been fascinated by that. Just a little thing. And when a lot of times, especially sort of growing up or having my studio and working in South Central, these narratives come up, these kind of almost stereotype of ideas. So people say Baltimore, The Wire. You know, and how does one get past these like huge narratives that block out the sun to look for those details? So yes, my salon's in South Central. Yes, my studio's in South Central. And yes, I'm in South Central. And yes, I'm black in South Central. So how do you get to these other little conversations besides these stereotypical ones? I always look for little things that point to things. And one of the things that I noticed were always these merchant posters that were always on the telephone poles. There was not even a name for them, and these point to really what's happening. The reason why I like the divorce and custody in Spanish was years ago, I was like, ooh, I didn't know, that's happening now too? And they got it in, you know, Spanish. So I like to look for these kind of shifts, these kind of locks and twists. That was early, like, natural hair moment. I always look for little shifts that are happening. Unfortunately, it went from divorce and custody in Spanish and locks and twists in 2000 to losing your homes. That's what you see now. Are you losing your home? Title car loans. We buy ugly homes. It's almost like really reduce or erase your criminal record, free legal fare. So you know that if something like that is on a telephone pole, you know that the judicial system is failing this community at such a huge amount that I was really surprised by that. I thought, wow, that's a lot of people have criminal records because it's very hard to get a job with a criminal record, and a criminal record can be a very small infraction. So I just thought that was a kind of an interesting one that pointed to something.
And these signs are a historical record of a neighborhood that nobody else has thought to collect. It's an amazing piece of history.
Go, Bessie.
Where would you like to go? This painting? Helter Skelter.
It doesn't read that well.
No.
It's really big.
Oh, that's kind of close, yeah. You know, I started to kind of think about grand narratives of painting, and so I did a few paintings that were 50 feet by 60 feet long or something like that, to kind of think about ideas of immersing oneself in things and how you can kind of fall away in it in a way.
And also you stopped doing the end paper paintings right when everybody else was so excited about them and everyone wanted to buy one, and you just pivoted and went on to something immediately that was really different.
Well, that's, okay, here's the thing. I really am an artist for myself, and I really follow the things that I'm interested in. When I first started making a little money with the end paper paintings, and that was the first money I ever made, it was hard to let go. I was like, no, oh God, I'm just paying my student loans down and everything. But you gotta just keep going. You gotta keep going down whatever road it is for you need. And so I just started adding things, bathroom caulking and paper from the streets and merchant posters. I just kind of turned my gaze more out to material, like what could I find? And yep, and this is those is kind of, that. So, is that Pi or Diego? I think Diego's up there. So when I stopped using the tissue paper, I started using material from the streets, and I kind of put on these like security jackets so nobody bothers us, and we go out in the streets, and we put the cone down because people are like, well, no way anybody would take this stuff for free, and you sit there and you hack it off, and you look real pissed off because you work for the city and they don't pay you enough. It's really the only way to get it. And I always wear whites because I look like a house painter, and it's like you can just fall into Home Depot. Nobody thinks you're an artist. These are like strategies, and you try to get the whole thing off at one big roll, and then you try to put it in your truck, and it falls out of the truck, and well, anyway, it's part of it. And yes, I still have to go out and get the material, which is really annoying because I don't feel like it, but yeah, I still go. So what it is all of the fly paper posters, and year after year after year, and it gets real thick, so I drive around long enough and I figure out, and then we go out and you get a crowbar and you just go all the way to the bottom and you just peeling it off to these big, area. I look so skinny there, don't I? Lord have mercy. Look like one of them praying mantises. You know them those skinny praying? Woo! I ain't never had no body. Little skinny legs. Look, my ankles go all the way up to my hip. Lord. So just material, just material. Yeah, you can go through these. Just how the material has so much memory in it, and you pull it back into the studio, and you make this kind of, thing. So we can fast forward to, I did something at the Hirshhorn, and it was around something called Pickett's Charge, and it was about the kind of Battle of Gettysburg. There was a cyclorama, and I kind of created my own cyclorama dealing with the Battle of Gettysburg and how ideologies were pulling the country apart at that time, and how the violence just heightened until we came to the Civil War. And it's really interesting. I went to Gettysburg, and we went to see the Battle of Gettysburg and the Old Glory, And I was really surprised at how nostalgic and kind of romantic it was, and the music, and it was very somber, and it ended, and I thought, well, this is a good thing, right? That we won. That's a good thing, right? Especially for my people. But I was surprised of the romanticism around that cyclorama and around the narrative of the Old South. I wasn't prepared for that. I walked out and was like, happy days. But it was just, it was interesting. And so, yeah, you can go to some new ones. I mean,
There we go.
There's a new, the very fast forward. This is Venice, Italy, because I was there and I did a lot of drawings. very recent. Oh, that's my assistants. I think Steve's up there.
Steve is here.
Steve's up there. He's embarrassed now.
So you guys talk for a second. I'm going to find some images from the pavilion to chat about just a little bit.
So why did you decide to go back to the end papers for Venice? We talked about how far you went.
It's where I started. And it's kind of, and I knew that in some way I wanted to tell a whole full story. I didn't know how full I wanted to tell it, but I knew that I wanted to tell kind of a full story.
Did you know you were going to tell that it was going to be so biographical?
No, I didn't know that. I didn't know that. But it's an international platform, so why not just give some of the large things you want to talk about?
So for those of you who were not in Venice, which I'm sure is the majority, you're seeing the totality of Venice in Baltimore at the BMA, which I think is pretty staggering, and I don't think I can give enough tours of that show. I think the talk I gave this morning to a group of trustees, I enjoyed as much as they did. It's so astoundingly content-rich. You can talk about social histories, you can talk about art histories, you can talk about your history, all as one seamless whole. So probably the only thing that's missing from our presentation is what you did outside the pavilion. A sort of scorching of the earth, which relates, or at least has always related in my mind to one of your early paintings, Scorched Earth. But I was struck in Venice in 2017 by how beautiful the outside of every pavilion looked and how devastated you made the US pavilion look.
Yeah. Well, you know,
It's a leading question.
You know, for me, it's Jeffersonian architecture, and it's based on Montecito, which is Thomas Jefferson's plantation. So, you know, I walked up to the pavilion, and I said to a group of people, "Oh, Thomas Jefferson." I said, "Oh, well, I wonder how Sally Hemings would feel." And they said, "Who's Sally Hemings?" I said, "Oh, well." Sally Hemings was Thomas Jefferson's mistress, and gave him slave, and bore him children. And so that's why there's African American Jeffersons and white Jeffersons, right? So, but for me, that was visceral. I thought, this feels kind of a little bit like a plantation. And at the same time, the country was going through a kind of a scorched earth. I mean, I sort of gone from, and so I just kind of decided to work out in front for 3 months and then just leave it almost like a barren place. Now,
so maybe you could explain what that image is.
Oh, that is, so I built the pavilion, and I rented a studio and I built the pavilion life-size so I could work in it for a year.
In Los Angeles.
In Los Angeles, so that I could work in it and get comfortable. I mean, I just got tired of everybody telling me what the pavilion meant. It felt like it's like the White House. So I had to kind of build it. And then I built the work for it, and the poem from the outside. So it looked abandoned from the outside. It really looked like something boarded up that you'd see in, and then the poem, all the work kind of started around the poem about kind of being put out for being a little different and kind of wandering and finding safe spaces and finding your own voice and kind of that full circle, I think, in some ways. I think I do think so, you know.
And so this is I'm fascinated by the poem. I talk about this all the time.
Really?
Well, I think it's amazing that you don't really need a didactic text to understand the show. The sort of the skeleton key for the entire exhibition is that poem. And if you read it and understand it, you can navigate the show pretty clearly. But what really fascinates me is that I'm sure you've written poetry privately. This is the first public poem, and millions of people read it in Venice, and it was literally driven into stone and inscribed in the outside of a building. So that's a big gesture.
Yeah, it was a big gesture. I should have thought that one through a little bit. Talking about getting out of cars and should have got out the last light. You know. Lord, Mark, sometimes.
And it bears a lot of your life story.
What do you mean by that?
Well, no, not much.
Yeah. It did. I mean, Hephaestus was this god that wasn't perfect. I liked it because he wasn't perfect. I like this idea of taking these old narratives, and reinvigorating them. He wasn't perfect. And it also talks about being put out of a, kind of a community for being different. Not all of the community, but being put out by people who didn't appreciate difference. And also kind of taking the weight of blame off of kind of, I think, my mother, people saying, so these kind of things circulated around. And so the first thing you come across is this kind of having to navigate around this. The center is no longer available, and you navigate on the peripheral.
And that's really the address of Spoiled Foot. And from Spoiled Foot, as at the BMA, you emerge into this space.
Yeah. I think that the Medusa looks better here than there, though. It's kind of flat.
I completely agree.
Anyway.
Now, I've heard many people say, those who were in Venice and those who are here, that the show does look better here. So anybody who missed it in Venice, you should feel great about the fact that it looks exponentially better in Baltimore.
Do you feel like it means something different here?
Yes, of course, because this is a 65% black city. I mean, the context is totally different. Venice it's Italian. It's Italy. It's in the Giardini. It's a international art world. It's very different. Very different.
And I think we can feel proud that so many big museums all over the United States wanted this show in New York and Los Angeles, and Mark said, no, it's coming to Baltimore. And that's what.
Well, Baltimore helped me get it. Baltimore helped me get it. So why would it go somewhere else? It just didn't make any sense to. I mean, it's the truth, though, right? And the paintings, you guys have seen the paintings, Go Tell It on the Mountain. I can kind of end with that one. I love James Baldwin. I've always liked James Baldwin. Him standing up there. There's a YouTube video of him giving an address. Is it at Oxford? Harvard. The way he I think it's Oxford. I'm not sure.
It's Oxford.
It's Oxford. And the way he stands up and just his impressiveness, and I always liked that that strength and that heroicness, but he carried his vulnerability with him, and he carried his love for his community, and he carried his love for the church and the paradoxes, and it was fabulous. And I guess actually in some ways this last image is of this person, Melvin, who I know, who walks down the street near my studio, and he carries everything with him, his vulnerability, the possibility of getting to where he's going, or the possibility of something violent happening. I always say you can't forget violence. Violence is alive and well in communities, but there's also a strength to what I'm seeing there too. So that was what Venice was.
So I know we have a very hard stop at 4, and we have a big and vigorous audience. So if you guys have any questions for a couple of minutes, I know that we would all, when I say all, I mean Mark, would be glad to take them.
Do you want me to?
Thank you. So you were talking about using your hands, and you said if the picture falls apart, you fix it. So have you discovered any new ways of fixing it? Did that sort of lead you to new materials?
Mm-hmm. Yep, that's a good question. Because I've had to kind of develop things as I've gone along. Yeah, every time I work myself into a hole, or every time a picture falls apart, which is like every day, I got to figure out something. I got to figure out another, like, what can I get? What can I use? What can I? You want me to get one? Yeah, all the time. I have to, all the time. Okay, now I'm going to use rope. Now I'm going to use caulking. Now I'm going to walk around the block and, I don't know, go get a taco. Like I'm at Home Depot. Like I'm always just. They're not happy. They're not happy. No. I'm not a. I wish I could tell you I'm one of those artists that is just like, I walk in my studio every morning, I'm Mark Bradford. And I'm not like that at all. Every time I make a painting, I think it's not going to be good. And every time I finish a painting, I think it's the last painting I'll ever make, and I better go back to the beauty shop. Every time. And then I come back in the next day, and I kind of start, and I say, oh, it's still there. I'm not a confident artist at all. Whenever they tell me, oh, Mark, you're going to do a show, and you're going to do a show here, and I said, well, I don't know. Might not have an idea. Yeah, I'm not.
That's why it's so good every time.
Yeah, but I wish I could be a little more, open the doors and like, I'm Mark Bradford. I'm more like, I hope it's gonna be okay. And then I ask Diego, what do you think? Steve, what do you think? Just get going, just start. Yeah.
So I'm just curious because I see your work and it's so incredible at this moment. Have you ever thought what it's going to be like 20 years from now, 50 years from now, and what they're going to have to do to keep making it as beautiful as it is now?
No, honey, I don't know.
I
don't
figure
even,
not.
I didn't even, let me tell you, if I would have planned, I would have planned my life a little bit more if I knew that I was going to be doing this. I wasn't planning on any of this. None of it, none. I wasn't, what was I planning on? Nothing. I mean, really, I was just trying to pay my bills and then, go to the nightclubs. And I was thinking, okay, how long are you going to just stay at the nightclubs? And then I thought, well, I'll go back to community college and try to, the only classes I seem to be able to finish are art classes. And then, well, let me see if I can get through that class. Oh, I passed that class. Who knew? Let me try another one. Oh, that's just, no. Don't blame.
Can you speak in terms of, thank you, this guy is holding the mic. Can you talk from your beginning and how were you found? And, how did you get...
Well, what do you mean the beginning and how it was found?
No, I mean...
Before, after school? No. Before I went to school?
Not from the womb. But as an artist.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. How I made it, like how I started, when I got out of art school? Yes. You know what, I was not a careful person. I wasn't a careful artist. I wasn't a strategic artist. People say, oh, Mark, you have to be very careful. You have to be very strategic. You have to figure out where to show and what not to show. I would have shown in your garage. I show anywhere. I would show anywhere. I show in restaurants. I'd put up my work. I'd paint the walls afterwards, put it back in the truck. I just wanted to get my work out there. I'd show in every Black History Month show. People say, oh, no, Mark, you don't want to be in Black History Month. You're going to be relegated to only. I never had a problem with Black History Month. I said, what's the problem with the all Black History Month show? I mean, we're still different as any other group. So I show wherever I could, the art fairs, anywhere. I just got, and if there wasn't an opportunity, I'd make an opportunity. I'd open my studio up and invite the whole hair salon through. Whatever I could do, I did. I was always very humble. I think sometimes when I hear some of the younger artists now, they really talk kind of like strategy. Like, oh, I'm very concerned about, where I show and who I show with. I'm like, oh, really? Do they want to show you? Yes. Well, girl, show. I just never was like that. Maybe I would, well, no, I just never was like that. So I would, wherever I could show, it was always yes. Oh, yes, I'll do that. Oh, that sounds interesting. Sometimes you get your feelings hurt a lot. A woman, she said she changed my appointment to come to her gallery to show my work 15 times. The 16th time, she said, well, come, just put it in your car and just roll it out in the parking lot. Other people would have gotten the feelings hurt. I rolled it out in the parking lot. I didn't have a plan B. What can I tell you? I always knew who I was on the inside, but, and I just kept doing that. And as opportunities would come up, I would just take them. If they said, Mark, we're going to give you the whole gallery, and then they call me back and they say, no, Mark, since you're nobody, we're going to give you the project room. And then they would call you back and say, well, since you're really nobody, we're not going to give you the project room, we're going to give you like the wall in the bathroom. I just take the wall in the bathroom as if, like it was the Whitney. Now, the thing that I always did, another thing is, Now, I'm used to having these crowds and everything, but one time I had a very bad review and 2 people showed up at my talk. I talked as if 300 people were there, as if this was many people there. I always took advantage of whatever the opportunities were, and when there weren't any opportunities, I would get my little friends together, we'd get a little money together, try to put our work up somewhere. I never expected anybody to do anything for me when I became an artist, because I just knew that that's not how it works. When I decided to make this walk, you're on your own. And I understood that fundamentally. I never was disappointed when I didn't get anything, because quite frankly, I didn't expect to get anything. So I just would take advantage of anything. And what I would say is, if there is no opportunity, make one. Make one. And that's what I've always done. I've never been safe. And I never do it the right way. I mean, I'm gonna start foundations and Mark, what are you doing that? And you're doing this and what? I've always heard that my whole career. I just have an impulse and I follow that impulse. And I would just tell any artist that, and you have to make money to pay your bills, and then you have your profession. If you never, ever sell one piece of work, but you are an artist, you're an artist. I don't put, the monetary value doesn't mean that you're not who you say you are, but you got to find a way to make the money, to pay your bills. So I just kept on. I kept on. I got one show, and then then I got the project room, and then the front room, and then I just kept on. I just kept on. And just not taking it personally when I didn't get something, or when I wasn't included in a show, or when I was overlooked of something, or when people would buy your work and put it at auction and make the money. And you just can't take it personally. And that's really how I am to this very day. I'm not that much different now than I was back then. That's all I can tell you.
Hi. So my question is about that work that you were doing where you're studying like pixelation. And I was just a little curious if you saw that as kind of part of like the glitching movement, or if you associated with like any kind of that at all. Glitching as like a source for, as a...
No, it really was, reproductions of images are really all about pixels, right? And so I really became fascinated by the fact that they really were just all these CMYK pixels, and if you blew them up, they would become these kind of, well, if you zoomed in really close, they would become abstractions. And so I started it really came out of advertising and thinking about advertising. And the material that's kind of above our heads, like Apple and all of these things, when you get up close, how it almost looks like these abstract paintings kind of close up. So it really came out of advertising, and advertising being propaganda, and like what I wanted to do with this material. Does that help? The what? No, I'm just, okay.
I think we have time for 2 more questions.
It's cold up here, too. It is cold. I don't have much weight on me.
Mark, Mark, thank you for a great talk.
Uh-oh. You got a good voice. I was like,
yeah.
Yes. I sat up. Put that drink away.
I've got a couple of questions for you. Couple of questions. One is that you brought up the issue of the burning of Black Wall Street, May 31, June 1, 1921. The anniversary, the 100th anniversary is approaching. Curious to know if you have any interest in making a statement about that centennial. That's one question. The second thing is that I'm curious as to your social commentary in your art, taking it to the streets so that we, black folk, know historically what your statement is, socially and culturally, about the things that have happened to us?
I didn't know about the centennial, and it's funny, when I was researching the Tulsa riots, more people know of it now, but when I was mentioning it before, everyone didn't know about Black Wall Street or the riot. It wasn't as much in the kind of conversation. Sometimes I'll pick something. I think it was because it was, when they called it Black Wall Street, that was the economic center of a community. And if you cripple an economic center, you cripple that community. So being a merchant and growing up in the local Black kind of economic center of the 70s and the 80s, I just kind of responded to it, like, what were the businesses that were destroyed in that riot, and where did the businesses go, and what happened to that kind of, I'm always fascinated by how capital moves through a community. The second part is that I do have a foundation. It's called Art and Practice, and we have a contemporary art space, and we show contemporary artwork, mainly by African Americans, and it's definitely a lot of women. And and it's in the community. It's definitely in the community. It's like the art space next to the African store, next to around the corner from the wig shop, and across the street from the barbecue. You know how we do. And I think it's very important to have these kind of conversations in local communities and give them access to these ideas so that they can debate them. If you are not at the table, you can't debate something. You can't have a say. I think it's sort of diversity, equity, inclusion. A lot of people are talking about it now, this kind of ideas. I think we get hung up at diversity. Oh, just give women a few, women's shows, and that's enough. That's diverse. Give people of color a few shows, but they never get into equity. Okay, that's another thing. It's like, wait a minute now. It's power. That's sitting at the table, calling the shots. And I often think that what happens in local communities, they just don't have enough access to these kind of contemporary ideas to debate them. So often when we decide that we want to be artists, we have to kind of unpack a lot of romanticism first to get to these kind of contemporary ideas. So that's what I do. That's my kind of way of my activism.
And one last thing, James Baldwin, Cambridge.
The what?
It was Cambridge.
Oh, it was Cambridge, yeah. It's black and white, right? It's on YouTube, it's in black and white. But isn't he talking to some other really famous guy about race? That's what it is, William F. Buckley. I was so impressed. I was like, he is handling William, baby. Woo! That was yes, that was it. So that's what I use, yeah. And one more, yeah.
Yeah, what keeps you grounded and what are you most challenged by?
What keeps me grounded? Lord have mercy. Everybody I know in my life. What keeps me? I've always been grounded. I mean, what keeps me grounded? Well, you know what? You keep the same people around you. Don't be swapping out no folks for some new people. You gotta have those people been with you when you didn't have nothing, them people. And I've been with the same partner for 20 years. I keep the same people around me. And I follow the things that I'm really interested in. I truly do. I follow the things that I'm interested in. It's not a strategy. It's not something I think other people are going to like. I really fought really hard for my own subjectivity. And I think I negotiated much more when I was a younger person, like the poem said, I should have got out at the last light. Kind of regret, but I didn't get out, because I didn't really tell them I should have got out. And some you still ride, and sometimes you don't need to ride, you need to get out, but you don't get out because your voice isn't big enough. I always say it takes a really long time to learn how to say no, right? You understand that? A lot of people understand that. It takes a lot longer to learn to say no. Yes. You just yesing all over the place, and inside you're like, no. But what motivates me?
Challenged by.
What challenges me? What challenges me? I don't know. The challenge, like bad, like I can't. It's hard to.
I sense that there's emerging between the personal and the professional. So that's what I meant as far as with that merger, what most challenges you.
That people won't get behind all of it. They just want the starry stuff, but they don't want to roll up their sleeves for the, the hard stuff, the social stuff that you're talking about. That's kind of what sometimes is more challenging, to make people understand that everything is important to me, not just what hangs on the walls. The whole project is important to me. And you can't put a monetary value on everything. But just because something's not making money doesn't mean it doesn't have value. That's what kind of gets on my nerves a little bit. Good intentions and good intentioned projects that people don't fund. That really does bother me. So that is challenging to make people see that there's more value than just monetary in some of these projects, because some they don't have a monetary return, but then there's other returns that are just as valuable. So that's kind of challenging, but I work it out. I work it out. Thank you, guys. And we've thanked everybody who did Venice, but the two assistants that went way before me and were there for 2 months and did so much of the work for me are Diego and Steve right back there. They're 1, 2, 3. You stand up. I know you're already embarrassed, so yeah. It's a very important to take your people with you and to kind of give them access and opportunities. They're both going on to do whatever they want to do. A lot of times I do that in my studio. Everybody doesn't have an art background. Sometimes we have kind of a mentorship program and we work with them, and sometimes they have an art background. It just depends. But I just wanted to let them know how important they were and how much I appreciate you guys, right? Okay, I'll buy you a glass of champagne later. And I want to thank the people from Greenmount too, because they were amazing. And when I was there with them, I said, I know you. I said, you're my sisters, I know you. And I meant that. And the work that you guys are doing at Greenmount is so alive. I felt it as soon as I walked in, and I was so impressed. I always say you were ready for the blessing. Because, you got to be ready for the blessing. You got to have the milk and the cereal. You can't just have the cereal without the milk. So it's amazing what you guys want to do there. And Chris and Katie, I want to thank you guys for just getting behind my crazy project. Because when they said, I didn't really want to do the Venice Biennale, not really, because I knew it was going to be a lot of work. And they kept convincing me and kept convincing me and kept convincing me. And then I changed my mind about 50 times, at least 50 times. And they got behind it, and I would change it, and they would go down that road, and they would go. It takes a special type of person to roll with me. You got to be kind of flexible. You do. So thank you for that.
So you guys are released. Thank you so much for coming. Thanks for listening. And remember, the Greenmount West Power Press shop is open for business.